swing's gone off, struggling to hit fairways, losing the feel for the game. Lewis, help me out. What can you do to help me get my game back when it's gone off?
We've got 3 good tips, so let's get into it. So the first big one for me is inputs over outputs. It's so easy, isn't it? When you start getting off to a bad start, you go bogey, double bogey, or whatever it might be relative to you. It's so easy to get emotional and then start trying to force a score back. But really, just going back to the same routine can settle you down a lot, I think.
Yeah, I find, for me on course, if I start to lose the feel for the shot's starting to go off, I start to get a little tight, a little steery, so focused on not hitting a bad shot.
Yeah.
And that's just a card wrecker in itself.
Yeah. I think you're always going to hit bad shots, but hopefully if you're swinging it well, the bad shots aren't that bad. So it's almost not trying to eliminate them completely, but just go back to a routine, because you're not going to hit it every single time. But I get, if you're off to a bad start, it feels like you are going to hit a bad shot every time. But it's trying to take the emotion out of it and trying to keep the logical, why am I hitting this club? How far do I have? What's a good target? And then fully going into the process and fully committing to the process, rather than being over it, thinking, I've rushed onto the tee box, I've grabbed my 7 where really I think it's an 8 iron, and the process kind of goes out the window, and then suddenly it's tough to get it back on track.
And this is something you see the top players doing the whole time, is that they have routines and processes before they hit a shot. Yeah. And some of that process is the caddy it's amazing how important they are in the process of saying, you often hear them say, love that club, that's a perfect club. It's that positive reinforcement, but going through that before each time they step over the ball, mentally they're in a great place before they take each shot.
Yeah, it's also really interesting where there's not just a pre-shot routine, but you can also have a post-shot routine at the same time. And I did a course once who worked with, this guy worked with Darren Clark and worked with Darren Clark's caddy. And whenever Darren Clark would hit a bad shot and he would storm after his ball with the same club in his hand, this guy told Darren Clark's caddy to stay exactly where he was until Darren Clark brought the club back to him. He could get 200 yards further down the fairway. He had to stay where he was. He would have to bring the club back, put the club back in the bag, and say something like finished. So immediately the shot was done. You don't take the club up to the next ball and just give it another hit. It was like very, very deliberate that once that one shot is finished, it's the next shot. And that's all you ever have. And I think that's where it gets difficult, because you might shoot 5 over handicap in the first 5 holes and then suddenly be thinking, oh, but I've got to shoot 9 over par the whole round to shoot handicap. And suddenly you're thinking way out in the future and less back to the process.
And is that the bit of that sort of process versus outcome, the outcome being the total score for the round, the 18 holes scoring? And we often hear players saying, oh, we break it down to 3-hole batches. Is that kind of the focus of what you mean by process outcome, or is it a kind of swing process, is what a lot of people might understand that?
It's a little bit of both, to be honest. It's a little bit of both. For me, I think it applies to anything in life, right? When you have a routine, like when I come in here, I write my to-do list, and it's just my routine. It gets me into the mode of working. Whereas if I come up and I've got loads of thoughts going on, I find it quite difficult to get going. And I think when you are applying that to a golf scenario, if you step onto the tee box and you're over it and you don't have a clear target, you don't fully trust your club choice, you haven't taken the wind into account and you're over it and it starts blustering again. If you're over it and you're almost in 3 places at once, it's so difficult to make that committed swing and get that outcome that's consistent. The other aspect is, and you can get me your opinion on this, but I think for kind of a mid-handicap, having a swing feel when they're over it is almost to some degree more important than thinking about the outcome, because if they're trying to create the outcome, they might not have the movement to create that consistent outcome. So trying to think when you're over it of putting a good swing on it can sometimes be really, really helpful for someone who might not have the most consistent technique. Whereas someone like you who lives life on like a neutral path, you can picture a shape and self-organize to a degree. So I think sometimes that's that level of process, is that when you're over it, you have your trigger or swing feel which creates the outcome.
Yeah, and I think when you're, and the key thing is if you're practicing and when you're playing well, is to focus on what is that feel. Like for me, if it goes wrong, I get a little bit lateral, and that gets my hips going forward, right side drops under, and generally I'll flip it left. And a feel that I go back to is turning with my stomach.
Yeah.
So that stops my lower body and upper body getting out of sync, or helps reduce the impact of it.
Yeah.
But that gives me a positive feel to go back to. It's something that's it's a positive thought, it's rather than don't miss it left.
Yeah, absolutely.
The problem is your brain doesn't compute the don't bit of that. So all your brain sees is left. So actually going back to a turn back, turn through, it's a really simple thought. It's incredibly simple. Just 2 turns and a swish essentially, but the turn's focused on a particular area. That focus and clarity I think is a really key bit. But work that out when you're swinging well.
Yeah, and I think our kind of brain and movement pattern are so ingrained that I remember I had a client ages ago who was a motorcycle instructor, and he was like, I always teach people that if a car pulls out, you don't look at the car, you look where you want the bike to go. And it was like, wherever you look, you direct your attention. So if you're over it and you haven't gone through a routine, you're thinking, oh, I've hit last 5 tee shots right, there's OB right, just don't hit it right. Suddenly it's like, it's probably going to go right, or completely go over the other way, rather than go through the process where you just focus on the inputs and the swing thought that delivers your tight fade. And if you fully deliver on the inputs, then the output is a tight fade, within reason. Obviously we're inconsistent, but it's just interesting that the routine is everything.
So don't get over focused on trying to salvage the round. Actually focus your focus, tighten your focus on positive inputs. That will then take care of most of the issues and hopefully sort out some of the output.
Yeah, I think it's key.
So what did I do there? Something that we all do. That one's, for me, my missus left, and that's tailed over left. So in this scenario, we're saying, right, if your driver starts to go off, one of the biggest, most important things, and we're going to look at the club side for this, is be in play off the tee. In play off the tee versus distance is so key at any level. Maybe on tours they talk about hitting it further, but actually in reality for your average club golf or amateur player, being in the fairway, in play, trumps 20 yards further and in heather or behind trees. So with that swing, it's really symptomatic of not committing to the move, starting to lose a bit of trust in what's going on, starting to lose a bit of trust in the outcome from this club, and then putting that steery, tentative swing on that's only going to have one outcome, and it's a negative one. So what do we do in that instance? Well, from a club point of view, you've got to have a club you can go back to and trust that might lose you a little bit of yardage over your best shot with the driver, but that can be a go-to in-play club.
Yeah, I think from a scoring perspective, if you're not in play off the tee and you've hit the first 3 shots behind a tree, OB, in water, topped, worst case scenario, you're just, you're on the back foot from the get-go. Whereas if you've got a safety club, which, excuse me, for me, 2-iron, for you I think you're saying 3-wood, it's like when I stand over my 2-iron, I basically guarantee I'm going to hit the fairway. Whereas if the driver's leaking off and then you don't have anything to back up on, you are just constantly, behind it, and it's struggle to make a score from there. Yeah,
and I think a lot of players would think, well, I don't want to admit defeat. We'll all be guilty of this. I don't want to admit defeat. I'm going to commit to it. I'm going to make sure this thing works. And then the next one misses, and the next one misses. And it's actually then having a plan B. Generally speaking, we're playing courses we've played a lot. So actually, you can afford to play it a slightly different way and still get away with making a score on a hole. So in this instance, one, it's having a club, as you say, it might be a 3-wood, it might be a hybrid, it might be a driving iron that you have a trust with. That's most players will have a go-to club in the bag. Look, heck, it could be a 5-iron. Just something to put you down the fairway and in play. Because from in play, you can attack a hole. If you go offline, it's a recovery shot and popping it, popping out sideways or hacking out from behind a tree or out of a bunker, and you're 1 shot down already. So better to maybe be half a shot back, but guaranteed in a good position to play the hole from there. And so in this instance, it's a mixture of, most of this is a mental thing, but having something you can trust. So for me, 3-wood. So the driver stays there, 3-wood comes out. And what this allows me to do is take the hole we've got here, This is the third at PGA National. It's a very tight hole, so it's quite, it's the kind of hole that you're not going to feel wonderful stood over a tee shot if you've not been driving it well. But I can take this club out and feel confident that I can take some of the trouble out of play because I can't reach it, but a club that I can put in between those trees. And the difference is we relax and we make a nice, positive swing that pops down the fairway, puts us, for me, I lose 30 odd yards over the driver, but I'm in play, I'm playing from the short grass, we can attack a hole from there.
So the third and final is double bogey or higher avoidance. Like, how much easier is it to not make a double than it is to try and make a birdie?
Yeah.
And I think it's basically for the typical golfer, making sure you don't get off to a bad start is really, really key. And I think a lot of the time, people might try and shoot pars and birdies, but actually there's going to be some holes where a bogey is just fine. And you realise this when you do this consistently over a whole season. You think, okay, just don't make double on this really hard 470-yard par 4, and my driver's struggling. If I make a 5, that's actually like not going to do any huge damage. Yeah. But I think when you start trying to force a score and you start getting off to a bad start, you try and make that par on that crazy long par 4, suddenly you're going to find yourself in trouble more. And it's that backwards mentality of, if I don't try and make a score, sometimes I actually make a much better score.
Well, it's like if you've got a long, tough par 4 and a short, easy par 5, it's so much easier to make the 4 on the short, easy par 5 because you've got that extra shot to play with mentally. Yeah. Versus your same length of hole. You could actually just switch. You could, take one hole and try to have it as a par 4 mentally and trying to make 4 is much harder than have it as a par 5 and making the 4. Yeah. Just that little mental switch of giving yourself a little bit of a buffer certainly helps for sure. Yeah.
I also think it applies to par 3s at the same time. Like, have a 205, 210-yard par 3 for the typical golfer. Pretty hard hole. Pretty hard hole. And sometimes with those, the stroke indexes are so kind of skewed sometimes, aren't they? You get a 210-yard par 3 with water along the front, and it's like stroke index 16. Yeah. But then you get a short par 4 that might be easier than that, and it's just tricky. But I think when you're over it and you're thinking that actually I'm going to give myself a bit of a buffer, it's amazing how the bigger numbers just start to really come down and they start to become bogeys rather than doubles. And I mean, from your perspective, obviously a great player, how much easier is it to bounce back from a bogey than it is from a double? Even that one more shot, it just seems so much easier to come back from. Yeah. And then if you exaggerate that to like a triple, suddenly it's like that's tough to really come back from.
And I think a lot of this is also de-risking situations as well. If you've got a little bit out of position on a tee shot, actually it might be a par 4, but the best play might be to play just short of the green rather than trying to force that extra 20 yards to get there, because that's then you've got more of a chance of getting up and down from a simple position in the fairway short of the green than out of a greenside bunker or worse. So kind of playing the situation, looking at, right, if it's a tough par 4, 5 absolutely fine, but you're going to make pretty much a cast iron 5 from 30, 40 yards short of the green in the fairway, or better, and you may be bringing 5, 6 or worse into play by trying to force that next shot.
Yeah, I remember at my old club there's a long par 4. It plays about 450, usually into wind, and the second shot, when we'd do playing lessons, would be a good 220-yard shot for some people with water all the way up the right. And
sounds lovely.
It's so hard, so hard. It's brutal. Like if you made 5, you're actually quite happy with the 5. Sometimes it was tough, but for the average golfer who wants to try and hit close to the green or on the green itself, they're usually using clubs that they're not that confident with anyway. So like a long hybrid off the fairway or a 5-wood off the deck, a really hard shot
tough
for a lot of
clubs
people.
To use.
Yeah, and you're just basically making it way more difficult. Whereas if you think like, if I hit a 6-iron 150, I've only got 60 yards left in, and then like you said, it's a flick onto a green and what could be a 4, it's probably definitely a 5. Hopefully, if you don't 3-putt. Yeah. And it's just like sometimes patient golf is so much easier to score with rather than watching golf on TV the night before, seeing them like stiff at flags from all over the shop, rather than just playing your game and your strengths and just gradually, nudging away at a solid score rather than trying to shoot lights out.
Yeah, and so the lesson is work out the strategy for you that works on certain holes. You've got shots to play with. It's actually recognising where those shots, your handicap can help you in certain situations. Yeah. As you say, we all watch the pros play and they're hitting shots that we can only dream of, but they make it look easy. So it's like you used to watch Seve and go, oh, I'll try that, and shock horror, it doesn't come off. And I think that's a really key thing of saying, right, where is a good place to be playing my next shot from? How much risk is involved in trying to recover from a situation? And actually kind of strip it back, simplify it down, clarify the shot selections. I think understanding from a technique point of view, I think understanding what your game is and your shot types is also a major part in that strategy.
Yeah, like that layup on that par 4. If you're not very good with a 5-wood or a long hybrid, hit 6 iron, 7 iron that you're happy with, and leave yourself with a wedge on, and then at the same time off the course work on that shot. It's not like you can look at this and listen to it and think, oh well, that doesn't sound like I'm going to get any better, but it's like it's 1% gains all the time, rather than thinking I'm going to try and hit that hero shot and suddenly I'm on the green. You'd find that on average you're probably going to shoot better over a season and get your handicap down over the whole year by making better, more often better small choices, rather than hitting that one hero shot, which you might think about when you have your beer after the round or whatever, but it's not really going to help the score over a long period of time. Yeah,
an example of that on the Pro Tours, the year Zach Johnson won the Masters. He didn't go for one of the par 5 greens in 2. And he
incredible.
Won. So there's a lesson in that for sure. Know your strengths, know why you hit certain shots, know your weaknesses. Again, that situation, if you know you'll miss with a fairway wood off the fairways right and there's water right, then are you bringing in more risk than you need to? Strategize from that, and guarantee your scoring will improve. Every golfer generally plays better when they have a caddying for them, giving them the right club. It's a confidence thing, but it's also better decision making. So know your game, make better decisions.
I think
scores will drop.
Pair all those 3 tips together and suddenly that could be a dangerous combination.
So to summarize, it's process versus outcome. Focus on the better, make better choices, better focuses, and really, don't think about trying to salvage too much from the game. Just again, it's the here and now thing, but focus on what's going to give you a better outcome on the next shot. Off the tee, have a backup club.
Vital.
Don't just bang away, bang your head against a brick wall trying to make the driver work. If it's gone off, go to a club you feel confident with that will put you in play. You can always build back up to the driver later in the round, but go back to being in play, and then take the big scores out of play.
Key, absolutely key. It's way easier to not make a double or a triple than it is to try and make a birdie, and I think that puts a lot of stuff into perspective.
So hopefully those 3 tips will get you round the course in fewer shots, make your game a little bit more enjoyable, certainly makes the drink afterwards taste a little bit better.
It does.
So something to work on over the winter, and have a great start to the year. Enjoy the rest of our videos, and we'll see you again soon.
See you soon.